this week I ran across a very interesting story. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of government grants, but are there any of you out there familiar with news grants? Now, I had never heard of them up until the editor of the Intercept brought them up in the story. And I'd bet the farm that it wasn't a decision he made willingly, but under pressure when faced with the least shitty options out there. Now, I'm a believer that when you've got something that's a weakness in your argument, you bring it up first. In other words, you beat someone to the objections. And it seems like the editor is as well, given that he tried to get ahead of the bad news first. What is the Intercept? Well, it's a left-of-center news outlet that was forced to confess an embarrassing admission this week. It had been accepting grants from one of FTX's nefarious philanthropic entities, all in the guise of supporting the Intercept's stellar work on biosafety and pandemic prevention. In layman's terms, lockdowns, mandates, and passports, the tyrannical trifecta. The Intercept reluctantly admitted that it was in line for a lot of grants. Just how much? Well, having already received $500,000 a couple of months ago, they were still eagerly awaiting another $3.5 million yet to come over the next 2 years. So much for the notion of a free press, huh? Just to prove that this wasn't a random one-off occurrence, ProPublica, oddly enough, another left-of-center news outlet, got even more payola than The Intercept. Just how much? Well, in an email to staff, ProPublica's editor broke the heartbreaking news that the unpaid portion of a $5 million grant for reporting on pandemic preparedness and biothreats was likely not to be seen again, just like monkeypox. Now, I'm sure FTX investors must be thrilled to learn that FTX was showering leftist news magazines with multi-million-dollar grants. Can you blame them, though? With inflation, owning the free press doesn't come cheap anymore. On the plus side, though, thanks to Sam Bankman-Fried, we've learned that news grants are a thing. Of course, I'm sure these fine pillars of journalistic integrity would tell you that grants are completely different and nothing like those nasty, despicable bribes. Really, they're not. Committed to doing what's the very best for FTX and its shareholders, SBF didn't simply write checks directly from FTX's bank account to news companies. No siree, that would have been so wrong. Not to mention highly unethical and unprofessional, two things that SBF certainly isn't. Which totally explains why one would simply pay $150, create a nonprofit foundation to pay some bills on your behalf. And as a bonus, Uncle Sam gives you a tax deduction for donating the money to your nonprofit before it turns right around and then grants the money to a news site from whom you'd like some friendly coverage. Sounds a lot like slushy, money, laundering, washing, I don't know. Seems to me I also recall Big Pharma doing something like this on all the news channels, but they called it advertising. That's how they spent their money. Now, it makes you wonder about the motivation of all these news outlets, though, who ran puff pieces on SBF prior to a couple of weeks ago. Wonder how many of them also got a taste of this grant money SBF was throwing around. Now, I know some of you watching are probably thinking that SBF wasn't engaged in philanthropic work, but buying himself some favorable coverage for his fraudulent crypto business and purchasing some insurance in case the shit hit the fan, like it has now. Man, you're cynical. Thinking that the editors who take multi-million-dollar grants can't still be completely objective and neutral? It's almost as if you were thinking they could be bought off. Proving their commitment to transparency, to the best of my knowledge so far, none of the completely objective news companies who got FTX money ever disclosed the fact before now. The real story behind the story isn't the fact that not only is there a market for big companies to give grants to news companies instead of buying advertising, but more importantly, not only is the practice apparently so widespread and so well accepted within the industry that nobody's blown the whistle on this lucrative gravy train so far. In closing, the collective media wants us to swallow that Sam Bankman-Fried was an altruistic genius. Sort of like Bill Gates, I guess, who because of his love of humanity became passionate about pandemic preparedness and biosafety, which led him to discreetly lavish a bunch of enormous financial grants to news agencies, grants that were so large that in some cases they potentially led to doubling the firm's annual budgets. Now, without knowing if there were any strings attached or requirements or restrictions or anything else that would have favored SBF and FTX, well, I'm sure he never asked for any favors. Now, even if we were to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that it's all true, is it just me, or does it trouble you that there's a market for directing what topics news companies focus on? Well, I guess they really can't be called news companies, can they? In this case, it would be SBF directing a bunch of newspapers to report on pandemic and biosafety. Even if we ascribe the best of intentions to his motives, it still looks a whole lot like SBF was buying news coverage. The only question is whether his intentions were actually altruistic or at their core self-serving and for a different or nefarious purpose. Anyway, thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. Please post any comments you have in the comment section. You can also follow me on my Rumble on my Locals account. If you're new to this channel and you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you're new, check out the other videos, and I'll see you next time.